Jacob is our youngest. He is completely different than his older brother in every way imaginable. Ever since they were little, they're like night and day. Jacob was the artistic one that as soon as he walked in the door, one shoe went one way, the other shoe went the other way. And, he was just that kind of carefree kid, but very, very kind-hearted, always friendly to everybody, even at a very young age. He was always super friendly, never met a stranger. And that continued right on through his teenage years as well.
So how much of an age gap is there between your boys?
About 3 years.
Were they friends then, being so opposite?
They were. They kind of bonded with different. They bonded early over music, and then Caleb, our oldest, he was kind of a writer. His younger years into high school, he liked to write, whereas Jacob was more of an illustrator. He loved to draw and that kind of thing. And so they actually wrote a book together, and it was pretty interesting. Caleb wrote it, and then Jacob illustrated it.
How old were they when they did that?
Upper elementary age. We made copies of it and gave it out to some friends and family for Christmas that year.
How precious for you to have that now.
Jacob is even from very young age, was big. Was a big kid. Caleb was smaller framed, but Caleb, being the older brother, kind of bullied him around a little bit, and it was kind of funny because what we kept telling him is Jacob was growing and growing and growing. You keep that up, and one of these days he's going to have enough. And he was you just about couldn't rile him up. But there were a couple of times where Jacob just had enough, and he body slammed Caleb or something, and Caleb would become, I can't believe what he did. And you're like, telling you, it's coming. It's coming. He poking the bear. Again, kind of very mild-mannered. Everybody who ever met him loved him. I mean, like instantly just loved him. He had that personality that everybody wanted to be around. Mm-hmm. Very laid back. Caleb is more like me. Very motivated, very type A personality. A good example for Jacob, he loved football, but he didn't have that aggressive attitude. So very big, very strong, but just really laid back. And I remember one time that he was in a football game, and he was the guard on the offense, and all of a sudden he just came alive on the football field and grabbed like 2 or 3 kids and he's steamrolling them, and the running back runs behind him and it goes on for a large run, and the coach, it comes off the field, and the coach is like, God, Jacob, what got into you? He's like, they made me mad, coach. And coach is like, I'm gonna make you mad every day then. So it took a lot to get him riled up, but when he got riled up, he could do some damage.
Generally, though, like we found out after we lost him that like some of the things that came out was in the cafeteria at school, in high school, he would be the one looking at seeing a new kid sitting off by himself and go sit down and make a friend. And so he just was he was a really big kid. He was 6'1", 6'2", big boy, but like teddy bear heart, just smart and intelligent, and inherited that Levitt sarcastic.
Well, her being the only female in the house, she got the brunt of the sarcasm from all 3 of us, and so she had to attain thick skin very quick. Yep. In our relationship. And then as the boys grew, sometimes she'd just be like, okay, that's enough.
That's enough.
She's not the quickest on the uptake, and so sometimes it'll take her a little bit of time to like put all the pieces together, and then she'll be like, "You guys," so that kind of a deal.
It's true.
All right. Well, do you want to go on now and talk about what happened with Jacob?
So back in August of 2015, all 4 of us, back it up a little bit further, Myron and I have been married. It'll be 30 years this year. We met through church. We tried to raise our boys through church. We were very involved, and all 4 of us had been at a church event that night where we each volunteered in different roles in the church event. It was really late. When you're volunteer at church, you're usually the first ones there and the last ones to leave. So it was late, and we had just gotten home when he got a phone call.
I got a phone call from our pastor's wife, actually. Jenny and I had gotten home a little bit before the boys. They had drove separately, and Caleb was driving the boys home from this event. And so I get a phone call from my pastor's wife, and she said, do you know where your boys are at? And I said, well, they're either on their way home or, at the church. They're finishing getting everything cleaned up and ready for church tomorrow. She said, well, we were leaving the church when we came across a car accident, and it looks like Caleb's vehicle. And of course, the first thing that you think of is, it's not them, and I said, oh, okay. I said, there's a lot of those. He had a Ford Escape. I said, there's a lot of little red Ford Escapes on the road. I said, I'm sure it's not them, but let me give them a call. And so she said, okay. And she said, I don't want to scare you, but the vehicle's on fire.